will come to order. Today, the Senate's holding its first oversight hearing of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, first time since 2019. Director Carvajal, thanks for joining us. To start today's hearing, I'd like to show a short video that offers a look behind bars for the more than 152,000 people in our nation's federal prison system. In 1993, at the age of 23, Alton Mills received a mandatory life sentence with no parole for a nonviolent drug offense.
Ones have to ask themselves, why did they give a young man, the age of 23 years old, a life sentence?
On a per capita basis, the United States has more people behind bars, 2.3 million, than any other country in the world.
Some of the biggest COVID-19 outbreaks in the U.S. are in the prisons and jails that house more than 2 million people.
They literally leaving us in here to die.
It's just looking grim. It's only a matter of time before we all get it. We just in here, look.
Andrea Highbear died tragically in BOP custody after delivering her baby while on a ventilator.
They hadn't called me at all to even let me know she was sick or that they were sending her to the hospital. Or I haven't heard from them at all.
Knowing that this virus is out there, it's hard to imagine, the layers of, frankly, ignorance and neglect that would have to take place for that to happen. And then just the lack of concern for humanity.
I wasn't there to see them graduated from high school, see my grandkids.
They're failing to protect the people who are in their custody, that they have a constitutional obligation to protect. They are failing to protect their staff and the people who work there.
When she was crying out for help, I know they had failed her.
You got to be a change. Because there's other people like me on the inside. They got families, got children. They need to be home.
I might just add that I know Alton Mills, gentleman who was just on the video here, sentenced to life in prison at age 23 for a nonviolent drug offense. He was released because of the work of this committee and changes in the law that have taken place. I thank Senator Grassley for joining me in that effort. Senator Cornyn was part of it as well and was signed into law by President Trump. Alton Mills has a job. He's worked ever since he's got out of prison. He's reunited with his family. He is no threat to society. He is making a positive contribution. For years, I've sought to address the injustices and challenges that impact the lives of incarcerated families, along with the staff who are responsible, the men and women who go into these federal prisons and work there. Their health and well-being is our concern, certainly as much as, if not more, than the inmates. Now, I've worked across the aisle, as I mentioned, with Senator Grassley to pass bipartisan legislation like the Fair Sentencing Act and the First Step Act to reform federal sentencing laws and help inmates successfully return. I've held hearings on the conditions of confinement. I think some of the most memorable hearings of my life were in this room with those who had been held in virtual solitary confinement, some for as long as a decade. And I've dealt with the issue of treating incarcerated individuals with mental illness. I think over and over again of the sheriff of Cook County, Tom Dart, who's a personal friend of mine, who says without any challenge from any side whatsoever, he runs in the Cook County Jail, the largest mental health institution in the United States. So many of these prisoners are suffering from mental illness. We still have a lot of work to do. When the pandemic began, many of us feared that barring immediate and decisive action, our nation's prisons were headed for catastrophe. March of last year, I joined Senator Grassley along with 12 of our colleagues in sending a bipartisan letter to Director Carvajal and the former Attorney General. In it, we urged you to use your authority under the First Step Act to swiftly transfer vulnerable inmates to home confinement. We sent that letter out of concern for the health and well-being of the inmates, as well as 37,000 Americans working in our federal prisons. At the time we sent the letter, only 3 inmates and 3 staff members had tested positive for COVID-19. What happened? In the months that followed, tens of thousands of federal prisoners tested positive for COVID-19. At times, the infection rate for the federal prison population has been nearly 6 times higher than in the community at large. As a result, 230 incarcerated individuals at least have died from COVID-19, nearly all of whom had pre-existing conditions that made them particularly and obviously vulnerable. Several were within months of being released, and 55 died after their request for compassionate release was denied and while their request was pending. One preventable death was noted in this video. Andrea Highbear, 8 months pregnant when the Bureau of Prison officials sent her to the Federal Medical Center in Carswell. She came down with COVID-19 and gave birth to her premature daughter while on a ventilator. Nearly a month later, Ms. Highbear died without ever getting a chance to hold her baby. Thousands of BOP staff members have also contracted COVID-19. At least 4 have passed away, including Rourke Mac MacArthur, a 42-year-old correctional officer at the federal penitentiary in Thompson, Illinois. These were preventable deaths. It's clear that the Bureau has been far too rigid in approving transfers to home confinement and compassionate release to reduce prison populations and to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Unfortunately, this is part of a broader pattern. The Bureau has failed to implement many of the First Step Act's reforms. Let me give you an example. The First Step Act required the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Prisons to develop a risk and needs assessment, but the pattern tool that the agencies created is deeply flawed. The Trump administration itself forecast that the tool would result in stunning racial disparities in inmate security classification. In December, the Independent Review Committee appointed by the Trump Justice Department released a report that found the Bureau of Prisons has failed to develop, and I quote, a fully integrated and comprehensive needs assessment system to diagnose the programming needs of individual inmates, a system the First Step Act requires you to develop. I might add that part of the First Step Act was constructed by Senator Cornyn and Senator Whitehouse on the prison reform side of the equation. The law also mandates the BOP provide all prisoners with opportunities to participate in programming to prepare them to return to their communities. However, many inmates still struggle to access programming to help vocational skills and receive mental health and other services. The simple fact of the matter is, and we know it, the majority of federal prisoners today will be out in society at some point soon in their lives. We have to anticipate it. We want that to be a constructive, positive experience and not create another crime victim. The legislation also requires inmates to participate in programming through earned time credits, but the Bureau of Prisons' proposed rule for earned time credits severely limits the ability to earn these credits, and that undermines participation. The Bureau's failure to implement the First Step Act reform speaks to a broader issue of mismanagement that has impacted everyone in our prison system, from the incarcerated to your own loyal employees. For years, the Bureau of Prisons have been plagued by chronic understaffing. It has been worsened by the previous administration's decision in 2017 to implement a hiring freeze that led to the elimination of more than 6,000 Bureau of Prisons positions. Today, there are still thousands of vacant positions. To compensate for staff shortages, the Bureau has come to rely on widespread and often mandatory overtime, as well as augmentation. Augmentation is a practice that forces non-custodial staff like secretaries, teachers, and librarians to work as correctional officers. The Council of Prison Locals, which represents most BOP employees, notes in testimony for the record today that, quote, the staffing crisis in the Bureau of Prisons not only creates a large, clear, and present danger to every employee, inmate, and the community at large, but has made the response to COVID-19 pandemic nearly impossible. The Americans working in our prison system are overworked, overextended, and undersupported. As a result, incarcerated individuals and the communities to which they return are put at risk. Simply put, our prison system at the federal level is failing, It's failing to fulfill its fundamental purpose, the rehabilitation of incarcerated individuals. As I said, most of the individuals are going to return to society. Instead of preparing them, we are failing them and failing American people who want, of course, safety in our communities. Part of that failure includes the excessively punitive and unjust practices to maintain order in our prisons, practices like administrative separation or solitary confinement. Following my hearings in 2012 and 2014, there were significant reductions in the use of solitary confinement. But I am troubled that the number of federal inmates in restricted housing increased significantly over the last 4 years. I'm gravely concerned that during the pandemic, the Bureau has used extensive solitary confinement as a means to enforce social distancing. You just can't separate people 23 hours a day without an impact on their mental health. This oversight hearing is an opportunity to get a clear accounting of what's going wrong in our federal prisons and what we need to do to fix it. We can start by vaccinating our inmates in a timely manner, not only for their protection, but the protection of all the men and women in the federal employment who maintain these prisons. I'm eager to hear about the Bureau's plans. When are we going to implement the First Step Act? How are we going to build the reforms that we passed on a bipartisan basis, signed by President Trump? We can't keep wasting valuable resources and taxpayer dollars to let people languish in prison. More than wasteful, it's inhumane. Too many lives have been lost, too many spirits broken by abuse and mistreatment, too many families torn apart. Let me turn to Senator Grassley.
Before I start my statement, I want to make 2 points. One would be to ask, without objection, for the record, a statement by the National Association of Assistant U.S. Attorneys be included.
Without objection.
And then you reminded me of something when you talked about Senator Cornyn's involvement in our First Step Act. You and I keep referring to your and my cooperation on it, but we have not forgotten. I know you haven't. Senator Cornyn, Senator Lee, Senator Booker's here now, and I'm
Senator
probably
White House.
I'm probably
White House.
Yeah, and I'm probably leaving somebody out, but at least those. And then we got to remember when you and I were starting out with a small group of people on this, that when it finally passed, it passed 87-12. So we wondered, where did all this opposition come from for so long a period of time with such an overwhelming passage of our legislation? But I make these points because too often you and I refer to each other, and neither one of us intend to leave out other people that cooperated.
You should always mention those other people one time for sure.
Yeah, okay. And no more than one time, right? Okay, let's go to Director Carvall. We welcome you. We thank you for being here. I look forward to your answers to committee's questions, as the issues before us are very extremely important. The committee last held an oversight hearing with the Bureau of Prisons, 2019. That was pre-COVID and before the first anniversary of the First Step Act. And obviously, as Senator Durbin has said, a lot has changed. So it's about time that we dig in, discuss these issues. In December 2018, President Trump signed the First Step Act. Getting the First Step Act passed was a very difficult effort, as I've already referred to. It required buy-in from nearly all members of Congress, the White House, the federal agencies, including your agency. Chairman Durman and I teamed up to get the First Step Act passed 2.5 years ago, and I'm grateful for the continued collaboration that I have with the chairman, working together. I consider the passage of the First Step Act as one of my good things that I've done since being a senator. It's because of the hard work and overwhelming bipartisan nature of the First Step Act that I'm disheartened with lackluster implementation. It seems as though the Justice Department, and within that department, the Bureau of Prisons, are implementing the First Step Act as if they want it to fail. I hope this isn't true, but actions speak louder than words, and the inaction of the Justice Department, the P on this, I think, paints a very difficult picture. I understand that the COVID-19 pandemic hijacked many of the implementation efforts, but your agency must do better and follow the law without excuse. An example of half-hearted implementation is the prison programming. Programming is critical for inmates. It prepares them to successfully re-enter society and allows them to earn time credit towards their sentences. Without effective programming, inmates will leave prison unequipped and possibly prone to reoffend. But the agency has been slow to resume programs for prisoners in light of COVID-19 restrictions. The lack of programming is setting inmates up to fail. Also, the Justice Department still hasn't issued a complete needs assessment tool as required by the Act. The risk and needs assessment system is critical in evaluating inmates' individual recidivism risk and tailoring appropriate programming to combat those risks. Without complete needs assessment tools, the law is only partially fulfilled, so another failure of implementation. Lastly, a current Justice Department position on home confinement fails to comply with the spirit of the First Step Act. March 2020, Attorney General Barr responded to calls by this senator and Chairman Durbin to increase the use of authorities in the First Step Act to place inmates in home confinement to mitigate the risk of the virus spreading. Earlier this year, the Justice Department released a memo stating that when the pandemic ends, nearly 4,000 nonviolent inmates who are currently at home in confinement will be returned to the prison's secure custody program. This means that almost 4,000 people who have abided by the terms of home confinement will be removed from their homes and returned to the facility. Obviously, if they can stay where they are, it's going to save the taxpayers a lot of money, and it would also help people who aren't prone to reoffend and allows inmates to successfully re-enter society as productive citizens. So, Mr. Director, I look forward to our discussion on how you can re-examine and prioritize this important legislation. We must also, at this time, discuss the Bureau of Prisons' response to COVID-19 pandemic. As of April 14th, 230 federal inmates and agency staff members died from COVID. People are incarcerated to pay their debts to society, but they shouldn't have to pay with their lives. I urge you to use your position as director to ensure that not one more life is lost from the virus, and I hope that this hearing allows us to look forward. I'm encouraged by your optimism, Mr. Director, for the future of the Bureau of Prisons. Your job is difficult and often thankless, and I suppose I haven't been very thanking to you in my remarks, but it's critically important for the job to get done. The weight of success of the First Step Act is on your shoulders, and your leadership will undoubtedly be critical in navigating federal corrections in post-virus world. Finally, I want to remind you that the Bureau of Prisons has responsibility to respond to all congressional inquiries, including those from the minority, in a timely and complete manner. I sent you a letter in March 2020, and it's been more than a year with no response, and that should be considered by everybody, including you, as unacceptable. When I was chairman, I made the same point on behalf of my Democratic colleagues. That responsibility falls to you. The Justice Department and FBI need to have a real problem with that responsibility, seem to have. I strongly urge you to send a letter, answer the letter. I look forward to working with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I took so much time.
No, that's just fine. Thank you very much, Senator Grassley. Let me tell you, today's hearing, after I introduce and swear in Director Carvajal, we'll have a 5-minute round of questions. I'd say by way of introduction of the director, Michael Carvajal began his career with Bureau of Prisons as a correctional officer in Texas in 1992. In July 2016, he was promoted to Regional Director of the Northeast Region and became the Assistant Director for the Correctional Programs Division in 2018. Former Attorney General General William Barr appointed him as BOP Director in February of 2020. So, Director Carvajal, would you please stand to be sworn in? Do you affirm that testimony you're about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the director answered in the affirmative, and now please be my guest and make your opening statement.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley.
Could you check your microphone and maybe pull a little closer? That's great. Thank you. Should be a red light there.
Okay, good morning, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and other distinguished members of the committee. It's my privilege to speak today on behalf of the 37,000 Bureau of Prisons Corrections professionals who work day in and day out to support our critical law enforcement mission. I am committed to ensuring that these dedicated men and women are guided by the core values of respect, integrity, correctional excellence, and courage. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the Bureau's response to the pandemic, along with our efforts to provide inmates with the necessary programming to return to the community and to their families. I have spent the majority of my professional life in career service to this agency. After serving in the United States Army, I joined the Bureau as a correctional officer and moved up through the ranks to my current position as director. I care deeply about our work and the personal sacrifices that the Bureau's law enforcement officers make and have made during the pandemic, and more importantly, our way forward. COVID numbers have dropped significantly across nearly all of our institutions, even as inmate movement has resumed, and despite communities reopening. We are taking the steps to normalize operations in stages as safely and with security permits, including inmate movement, food service, and ramping up programming. All of these efforts will have a positive effect on staff, inmates, and the Bureau operations. As we have throughout the pandemic, we continue to assess and adjust our operations as guidance evolves, and more importantly, to incorporate the lessons learned. In close coordination with the CDC and federal government's COVID-19 vaccine therapeutics operation, we pursued an aggressive strategy to administer the vaccine. All staff have been offered the vaccine, and by mid-May, we anticipate all inmates within our institutions have been provided the opportunity to be vaccinated. The Bureau has also assisted in administering the COVID-19 vaccination to other DOJ personnel. We worked with the DOJ leadership in planning 2 vaccine clinics, one in Miami and one in New York, to assist the DEA, FBI, and other law enforcement components receive the vaccination. Through these clinics, more than 1,100 law enforcement personnel were vaccinated. And while it's been an extraordinary year with many challenges, we continue to move forward and advance our priorities. There's been much discussion about the Bureau's staffing needs and the use of augmentation and overtime to accomplish our mission. We're committed to addressing these issues by increasing our staffing levels nationwide and retaining our staff. We initiated a hiring campaign focused solely on external hiring to maximize staffing levels, and we're using all available recruitment and retention incentives, marketing strategies, and social media to reach potential candidates. In the last calendar year, despite the pandemic, we hired 3,800 staff. In the past 8 weeks, we've hired over 500 new staff into the agency. Our aggressive hiring initiative, our use of incentives, along with a revised method for calculating bed capacity, will provide clarity, transparency, and have a significant impact on our staffing efforts moving forward. Our staffing efforts are central to the successful implementation of the First Step Act. I'm pleased to tell you that despite the pandemic, we are on track to meet the requirements of the First Step Act. Staff positions allotted under the First Step Act have already been utilized to expand capacity in our female programs, our drug treatment, and vocational training. Other innovations are underway to enhance programs such as life skill laboratories to teach the skills to basic inmates with the greatest needs, provide STEM career technical education for female offenders, and modernizing our inmate education platform to include the use of tablets to make programming more accessible. We are committed to successful implementation of the First Step Act and its impact on reducing recidivism. Finally, a key priority where we're squarely focused on is our work with the Government Accountability Office related to the management of staff and resources. In an effort to accelerate this work, I've established a cross-agency task force to develop an action plan to resolve the issues in a timely manner. Our work will focus on strengthening new programs and initiatives that will help inmates prepare for successful return to the community. We're working to develop stronger data analytics platforms, which will enhance monitoring and evaluation of our programs and spending. To this end, we're engaging external organizations to assist in assessing a broad range of operations to further these goals. On behalf of all the staff who are working tirelessly to carry out our important mission, I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, for your continued support to move these priorities forward. Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and other distinguished members of the committee, this concludes my statement.
Thanks, Director Carvajal. Last March, Senator Grassley and I, along with a bipartisan group of 12 additional senators, wrote to you and to the Attorney General, William Barr, to express serious concerns about the health and well-being of prison staff and inmates. At the time, the number of infected prisoners was reported to be 3, and staff another 3. That was at the earliest stages of our realization that COVID-19 was a serious threat to the public health. It didn't take a degree or Dr. Fauci's resume to realize that our prisons were particularly vulnerable because of so many people gathered in such a limited space. Well, we know what happened as a result of it. We came up with the First Step Act and other policies which established the opportunity for home confinement and compassionate release to reduce overcrowding and to allow those prisoners who we perceive not to be a threat to society to have a chance to leave that prison setting. Let me tell you the story of one of those prisoners. Forbes magazine reported a man named Jimmy Monk. Jimmy Monk was a young man, a first-time offender. He was convicted of a nonviolent bank fraud offense. His term in prison was less than a year. He collapsed in a shower and died from COVID-19 at the minimum security Talladega Federal Prison Camp. The Bureau of Prisons reported he had no COVID-19 symptoms, but his emails home and reports from those inside the prison tell a much different story. The reality was that he had multiple symptoms, received no medical attention. After he passed out in the shower, his fellow inmates rushed to help him, but the guards ordered them to leave him. Unable to even sit in a chair without the help of others, he fell, hit his head, and died on the floor. Why was a man like Jimmy Monk, a first-time offender convicted of a nonviolent bank fraud offense with less than a year to serve, not placed in home confinement? Were you given orders from above in terms of compassionate release and home confinement to restrict the number of opportunities that would be offered?
No, Chairman Dermott, I was not given any direction like that. On the contrary, I was issued 2 memorandums by the Attorney General that directed us to consider, under the CARES Act, everyone eligible for home confinement. In those memorandums was specific guidance for criteria. I assure you that if that individual you're speaking about, I won't speak about individual cases, but in general, any inmate that is eligible under the criteria presented to me by the Attorney General is on home confinement as we speak. What keeps them or prevents most cases are that they fall under one of those non-discretionary hard criteria. If you have a primary offense of violence, a sex offense, of terrorism, or a detainer, an order for deportation, you will not be placed on home confinement. As the statute is written, home confinement wasn't made for long-term placement. It's a reentry program. As you're well aware, Senator, 6 months, 10% of your sentence, 12 months in the community. At this point in time, we've released inmates under the CARES Act with more time than that, which is appropriate, but that's why the criteria is important. So we follow the criteria, Senator.
So what is the population? I mean, no one's going to argue with the groups that you have excluded from consideration for compassionate release and home confinement. What is the remaining population that doesn't fit into those categories among Bureau of Prison inmates?
Let me give you an example, Senator. That when CARES Act passed, we ran a roster. CARES Act is a medical placement. We ran a roster. At that point, at that day, there was approximately 27,000 inmates eligible for home confinement under the CARES Act. When we applied that criteria, that number was reduced to 4,000 just by those four criteria. Okay, and the other, that
So,
we had
excuse me.
discretion to go beyond that.
Excuse me, can you clarify? You said 27,000 out of the total federal prison population?
Who had at least one COVID risk factor, which is what specifically the CARES Act told us to look at, inmates who were vulnerable for COVID.
If you clarify, please. The total Federal Bureau of Prisons population at the time was over 150,000?
That is correct.
And so you identified some 27,000?
Who had at least one COVID risk factor.
And of those, you excluded many for the categories you mentioned of crimes?
We followed the criteria issued by the Attorney General at the time.
And you said there were 4,000 eligible in the Federal Bureau of Prisons?
The 4,000 was after applying the Attorney General criteria.
And
if
how
you
many
like,
were-
I can explain beyond that.
Well, let me ask you, I want to stick with the numbers for a minute. How many were actually released or placed in home confinement?
we have transferred, because they're still in our custody, we have transferred over 24,000 inmates to home confinement since passage of the CARES Act. Today, there's approximately 7,400. 4,500 of those, I'm using estimates because these numbers change every day, approximately 4,500 of those today are on CARES Act home confinement under specific CARES Act.
It's my understanding that the prison staff, and I don't know how large a group that is completely, they have been offered vaccines and fewer than one half have accepted the invitation?
Senator, we have offered every staff member in our agency the opportunity to be vaccinated. The rate right now, the last number I got yesterday was a little bit over 51% have accepted. Now, the one caveat there is that does not include staff that we're not aware of who received the vaccine on their own through their own care provider. We do know there are people that have done that, but we have offered the vaccine, approximately 51%. That's about 18,000 staff of the 37,000 have accepted it.
And is there currently a mask mandate for all staff at BOP facilities?
Yes, there is, Senator. There has been for quite some time.
And what type of testing is offered to the staff?
Staff testing is available. Each location, keep in mind, as you're well aware, we have 122 locations. We have a national contract laboratory where we can make it available. So there's several types and methods there, but each location worked with our local public health service to establish testing sites. We do not test staff on site. We don't have the resources to do that.
Could you tell me the percent of prisoners who have been vaccinated?
The percentage this morning, we've administered over 132,000 vaccinations. The percentage this morning was a little over 40%, about 50,000 or so inmates. Again, the numbers are changing, but as I stated in my opening remarks, our projections originally were August for everybody to receive it. By mid-May, 100% of the inmates in our custody will have been offered the vaccine. And keeping in mind that it's voluntary, the acceptance rate among inmates is about 66%. Again, that changes daily sometimes.
And those who are released, is there any testing before they're released?
Inmates are quarantined, mandatory in and out, quarantined before they're released. And if we have symptoms or anything of that nature, then we will provide the test upon release. Otherwise, they're mandatory quarantine unless they're showing symptoms, which time they're placed in isolation, which is a whole separate procedure.
I'm going to take leave as chairman to ask one other question, Senator Grassley, if you don't mind. There was a lot of controversy and votes on the Senate floor about sending the checks, the stimulus checks of $1,400 to inmates in prison. This was a policy that was originated in the CARES Act that was drawn up on a bipartisan basis and signed into law by President Trump. And there have been questions raised about what happens to that money for inmates. Can you tell us what happens?
Absolutely. It goes to the inmate. We've processed right about 22,000 checks for about $19 million. We've worked with the IRS, the Department of Justice Tax Division, and the Executive Office of the United States Attorneys to ensure that those inmates who were receiving those checks, that we worked through that and they received those checks. If for some reason, like with anything, if something occurs where somebody does all they need to do is tell us. We don't know who's entitled to the check, but we have ensured that 22,000 times inmates in our system have received those checks for a total of $19 million.
Out of 150,000 inmates?
Well, sir, I'm not sure who's entitled to them. I don't have that information.
I'm just asking you.
Yes, out of our current population of 125,000.
Isn't it true that money placed in a federal inmate account that exceeds $450 during a 6-month period, including stimulus checks, for example, is assessed by the Bureau of Prison to pay prisoner debts, including restitution to crime victims and fines?
Well, Senator, part of our policy and part of reentry is teaching responsibility. So if an inmate has child support or owes a fine or restitution, that is part of his reentry plan to be responsible and pay those debts. To my knowledge, the government, we don't assess that. We do make sure that they participate in the program to pay restitution and things like that. So there are those checks and balances, but we're not taking money from an inmate. There's a record of this. Everything is screened and gone through the policy as appropriate.
But I want to clarify this. If I'm a prisoner and I have received a $1,400 stimulus check, it's my understanding that $950 of that could be assessed to pay any restitution or fines which I have been ordered by the court to pay. Is that true?
I believe so, Senator. I'm not entirely sure about the policy. I haven't reviewed that policy lately, but I'm almost certain that if they have a financial responsibility, part of their reentry plan, part of getting them ready to return to society, 95% of them will, is to be responsible and make their payments.
And child support is the same type of responsibility?
Child support, anything where their obligations, that is part of being a responsible citizen and paying their bills.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carvajal. Senator Grassley.
You said in your statement that implementing the First Step Act is a priority for you and the current administration, and I hope it is, but I'm would like to know how we're supposed to know that. Is there some measurable or goals that you're trying to meet that we can say 6 months from now or a year from now, you're doing what you said you were going to do?
That's a great question, Senator, and I know that I wrote a lot of notes through both of your opening statements, and I hope I have the opportunity to actually answer these questions because I'm not sure where you get all your information, but I'm glad you called me here to be able to answer this because we are on track to meet the First Step Act. Last year, even through COVID, which is a whole nother issue, as you well know, we had over 50,000 inmates enrolled in some type of program. 21,000, maybe 25,000 actually completed a program. Those programs are worth earning time credits, which is what the First Step Act is about. So I'm not sure who's giving you your information. Now, could it have been more? Absolutely. But I don't know why someone would think that we would want something that is part of our mission. Reentry into society is half of the mission of the Bureau of Prisons. The first one is the obvious one, keeping people safe. So yes, we want the First Step Act to be successful, Senator, and I appreciate you letting me clarify that.
You'd do me a favor if you went through my statement and told me what's wrong. You don't do it now, but you can do that in writing. Since I'm disappointed in the progress that the Justice Department Bureau of Prisons have made. We're all acutely aware of the impact that the COVID-19 has had on prisons. But at this point, over 1 year, when President Trump declared COVID as a national emergency, I don't think that national emergency can be used as a scapegoat. Being accountable and moving forward is necessary. I mentioned in my opening statement, what you might tell me again would be wrong, that it seems like the Justice Department and the Bureau of Prisons has failed in this effort. For it being the most significant criminal justice law in a generation, if that's true, what I'm saying, then it's shameful. I certainly hope that this sentiment is false. And even if it isn't true, at certain points, perceptions become a reality. So if it's more unreasonable perception, how can you assure me and those affected by the First Step Act that the implementation that in this belief is incorrectly held?
Thank you, Senator. First off, you mentioned the risk and needs assessment. That was implemented in January of 20, right before COVID. I don't know why someone would think we don't have a risk and needs assessment. It's public knowledge. The IRC has acknowledged it. We worked with outside stakeholders to create this. We did not create the pattern tool. That's the Department of Justice's tool. It was done by independent researchers. It's been vetted. It's under reassessment now. We have a needs assessment. We've always done it informally. We didn't do it very well and formalize it, but our process has been formalized now. We've identified, again, with the collaboration of outside stakeholders, including correctional experts from other agencies, we established a needs assessment. 13 needs were identified. When we go through the risk process, we identify those needs, and then we apply one of over 80 evidence-based recidivism reducing programs or productive activities that are worth time credits. That is the essence of the First Step Act. So I'm a bit confused about where people don't believe that we're doing this, Senator. I believe we are doing it.
Okay. Now I want to go to home confinement. It's been a very vital tool to decrease the prison population during COVID, and it's successful in monitoring inmates. Of the 24,000 inmates who are currently on home confinement, 151 have violated the terms of their release, and only 3 have been arrested for new crime. This highlights how effective home confinement can be. Given this, I'm concerned that the Justice Department's memo concluding that the Bureau of Prisons would have to recall some nonviolent inmates currently on home confinement back into prison facilities once the pandemic period ends. This policy would result in almost 4,000 inmates on home confinement being forced to return to a facility to complete their sentences. The First Step Act's goals are to reduce recidivism while ensuring public safety, all while making sure to not burden the taxpayer. This seems, the policy that I referred to from DOJ seems to counter the First Step Act goals. So do you or do you not agree with that? And besides the legal reasons outlined in the Justice Department memo, is there any policy reason that inmates in home confinement under the First Step Act or the CARES Act should be returned to the Bureau of Prison facilities if they have not violated the terms of their release or committed a new crime?
Great question, Senator. First off, the portion that I'll start with is whether or not we're bringing them back. The reason the discussion, and I would presume that the DOJ issued that back in November, was the fact that the statute, the CARES Act did not change the statute. The statute as written allows for 10% or 10% of their time or 6 months up to 12 months in the community. CARES Act placement extended that. This program was not designed for people to be out that long. That's the first part. We would need to change the statute or have the authority to adjust it because we must follow the law, and that's what we're doing. The second piece of this is the president recently extended the national emergency. So there's no rush to bring these back. We're covered by the CARES Act. So we're not advocating one way either way. We're planning. We were asked, can we accommodate if we need to bring these inmates back because they're still in our custody? Yes, we can. You are correct. Your numbers on the 151, the 3 that were new crimes. Only one of those was violent. I don't know the details, but the rest of those is we would screen those. I want to make something clear, Senator, that for anyone to believe that we arbitrarily want to disrupt the lives of these people after we put them out, if they have successfully been out there, we're going to use good judgment and common sense and work within the law to make sure that we place them appropriately. We have plenty of bed space in our minimum security camps if they've proven they've been out. I simply ask that either the statute is changed so that we can follow the law, because as written, we wouldn't be within the law, or that we work with the DOJ as we do now, and that people understand that we are doing things within the parameters we're given. We're not doing them out of like or dislike or anything. We want this to be successful. It's the entire mission of the Bureau of Prisons to return people to society. So I don't know why people believe that we are somehow against this. I will say that we do it responsibly. Part of the direction the Attorney General stated in there was that we consider the victim, that we consider public safety, and we take that very seriously. So when we look at this criteria and we make these decisions, we make sure that we're not causing a burden to the public either. Public safety is part of we are a law enforcement agency. So I appreciate the opportunity to clear that up, because I don't want somebody to believe that the Bureau of Prisons somehow doesn't want to let people out. That's not accurate. We want to let them out within our authorities and within the law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Grassley, let's you and I work together on that last question, because I think it's an important one, and I think Director Carvajal said maybe a change in the statute is necessary.
Okay.
And we've done things like that before.
Obviously, my question would imply I want to work with you.
Good. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Senator Feinstein?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I have spent a lot of my past in prisons, particularly state prisons, under the California indeterminate sentencing law, sentencing and paroling women convicted of felonies in California. And so I'm very familiar with the atmosphere of these institutions. I wanted to just ask you, a recent study from the New York Times indicates that at least 39% of prisoners in federal facilities have been infected with COVID, more than 4 times the general rate of infection in the country. The situation, I believe, seems to be worse at the Terminal Island facility in California, where the virus, I'm told, has infected over 70% of the facility's population and killed 10 inmates. According to a January report by the Department of Justice's IG staff at Terminal Island, Terminal Island struggled to enforce social distancing and may not have been quarantining inmates before moving them to alternative housing. The IG also found that roughly 60% of facility staff said they did not have enough personal protective equipment. In light of this, Director, what efforts have been made to improve adherence to COVID-19 protocols, specifically at Terminal Island?
Thank you, Senator. Terminal Island, as you are well aware, was one of our earliest big outbreaks. What you said is absolutely correct. We had a widespread transmission. Our ability to social distance in a prison, we learned early on. Prisons aren't made for that, first of all. They're made for the complete opposite. Throw on top of that, Terminal Island has open dorm and open bays. Adds to the problem. It was at capacity or over. I don't remember the exact numbers at the time.
So how are you handling that open wards, open bed situation?
That's where I'm going, Senator.
Good.
We reduced the population. We've done that throughout because of a lesson learned, open bay, open dorm, not conducive for containment. So we've lowered the population and spread those inmates out. At the time at Terminal Island was something where we tried something new. We actually acquired tents. In a couple of cases, I believe at that location, we actually partnered with the Coast Guard. We set up temporary housing. Not orthodox. In a prison, the last thing in the world we want to do is put somebody in a tent outside within the perimeter, but we did that because we saw the effect that social distancing had, so we spread people out. We have used non-traditional areas to house people. We converted factories in some cases, rooms, anywhere we could spread people out, we did that early on. Terminal Island was one of those cases. The OIG did go in there. One of the things I'll point out about that, and we certainly appreciate working with them, we work hand in hand with them. They review many of our facilities. One of the things I'll point out, though, is that because that was so early on, Senator, everybody was dealing with this. We learned a lot of lessons through COVID. I wish I knew then what I know now about it, but we didn't know it at the time. COVID was new to everybody. We have a history of dealing with pandemics very well in the Bureau of Prisons, okay? COVID was different. It's extremely contagious. It happened very quickly. Testing resources weren't available at the time. They are now. They weren't at the time. And things like that, I think that people need to keep into consideration. You can't just empty a prison overnight. It doesn't work that way. We have different challenges within a correctional environment, always keeping safety and security first. So I appreciate the opportunity to clear that up.
Well, thank you. In response to a question for the record, I submitted after you testified before this committee last June, you indicated that the Bureau had reviewed 40,000 inmates for potential home confinement at that time, less than 1/3 of the total number of inmates in the Bureau of Prisons custody. Director, as of today, approximately how many inmates has the Bureau reviewed for placement in home confinement?
Senator, I wish I could give you a solid answer because the numbers have changed. I will tell you that we have reviewed everyone who is eligible and has at least a COVID risk factor. The CARES Act, actually, the way it was written, allowed us to review 100% of the inmates. But when you apply those hard criteria, the obvious ones that we aren't going to bend on, the violence, the sex offense, that lowered the number to the 27,000. If I had to make a guess, because our numbers have shifted over the last year,
a percentage would be fine.
I would say 50 to 75% at least.
Have what?
Have been reviewed at this
Right.
point.
How
I'll have to
many
follow
have
up with you on the
placed?
exact numbers. I'm
Do
sorry?
you have the placement facility, the placement numbers?
I'm not sure I'm understanding your question, Senator.
Well, you indicated that the Bureau had reviewed 40,000 inmates for potential home confinement. What portion of the 40,000, a percent would do, have been home confined?
I apologize. I wasn't tracking with you. At this point, we have placed over 24,000 in home confinement since the passage of the CARES Act.
Out of the 40,000.
I don't know if it was that specific 40,000, Senator. In general, we have, out of our population, we have placed over 24,000 in home confinement.
Well, and let me ask one other question. It's my understanding that there's an effort to ensure that every inmate in BOP custody receives the individualized review required by the Attorney General's guidance. And my question is, when will that be completed, and may we see it?
The guidance, if I believe what you're talking about, is the direction to individually review every case eligible for home confinement in the totality of circumstances and applying those criteria. That's exactly what we do. We follow the direction in that memo.
Well, may we see the results?
I don't know how I would do that, Senator, but I'll certainly talk to my staff. And what I mean by that is it's not that I just don't know how we would accomplish that, but I will get back with you. I will follow up with you. I just need to talk to my staff about how we would present that to you.
Well, I will write you a formal letter asking for the specifics, and you can either adhere to it or not. That's
Absolutely.
your choice. But I believe we are entitled to know this. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Feinstein. Senator Cornyn?
Mr. Carvajal, you and I may be two of the only three people on the committee who know where Three Rivers, Texas is, where you started out your service in the Bureau of Prisons. But I just want to say thank you for what you do day in and day out. I can't imagine the challenges that confront the director of the Bureau of Prisons, and I want you to let us know what we can do to help you accomplish your goal. I'm glad you made the point that you want to be able to release inmates when they're no longer a threat after they've served their time. I think the perception is just the opposite, and I'm glad you clarified that. But in Texas, as you know, we made a major effort at criminal justice reform focused on people who would take advantage of the opportunity to deal with their addictions, learn a skill, and be prepared for life outside of prison. And it was that state-based experiment that was duplicated around the country that formed the basis of my interest, in particular in the First Step Act. Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, I think, was my partner on that, and I want to make sure he's recognized for his contribution too. But by its name, we didn't expect to stop with the first step, and we're interested in your advice and counsel on what the next step should be. For example, I know the experience in Texas at the state system was the legislature continued to look at follow-on services that might be available, because I can only imagine once an incarcerated person is let out of jail, they go to their own old neighborhood, subject to a lot of the same influences they had in the first place, and it's hard. It's tough. I mean, you got to admire people who can continue their rehabilitation and want to be constructive members of society. So we want. I'll just ask you that question for the record and ask for maybe you and your staff to let us know what additional services Congress should authorize in order to make sure that this recidivism reduction program is successful once people get on the street. Sexual assault in prisons is something that Congress has addressed previously, and what I am interested in is, do you know how many prisoners in the federal prison system currently have access to services like telephone hotline services if they've been a victim of sexual assault?
Yes, Senator, all of them. We make sure that is that we speak about that. It starts with admission and orientation. Obviously, PREA plays a big role. 100% of our facilities are PREA compliant. They're reviewed often. We make sure that inmates have the number. They're posted, electronic bulletin boards, regular bulletin boards, and we certainly encourage them to come forward, whether it's to staff or by the use of the hotline, to report things of that nature.
Well, I want to make sure that every victim of sexual assault in our prisons has access to services and that hotline number. And so I'm going to follow up with you and see where we are. And I'm sure wherever we are, we can always do better. Senator Durbin asked about stimulus checks for inmates. There were 2 votes on the floor of the Senate, one in 2021, and Senator Cotton and Senator Cassidy and Senator Cruz offered amendments that would have prohibited the issuance of stimulus checks to prisoners. That failed by a vote of 49 to 50. There was another one by Senator Cruz and Senator Cotton, joined by Senator Cassidy, that would prohibit any individual who was incarcerated in a federal or state prison from getting stimulus checks. That also failed by a vote of 49 to 50. But just going back on the history of these stimulus checks under the CARES Act, initially Congress was silent as to whether prison inmates would receive those checks. The IRS took the position that they were not eligible. And then there was a class action lawsuit filed, which said that Congress that the IRS had to comply because there was no explicit prohibition. So did I recite the history of your experience correctly? In other words, originally Congress was silent, then the IRS took the position they weren't entitled, then there was a class action lawsuit that said since Congress was silent, they had to be provided. Is that correct?
Senator, I don't know about the specifics. I do know that there's a class action lawsuit. I do know that the Bureau of Prisons, for a fact, is not one of the defendants. And as with everything that we do, we follow the law, the legislation, and we do with what's within our authorities. And that's what we've done. We've ensured whoever made the decision and how it was made, once it was there, we followed it. So as I stated earlier, we made sure that inmates who receive those checks, working through the IRS, the DOJ, and other appropriate offices. That's what I do know, sir.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask one follow-up question? You've been asked about prison overcrowding, particularly in the face of the pandemic. And I would note that at the beginning of the Biden administration, there was an executive order issued by the administration prohibiting the use of private prison facilities. I believe now there were roughly 14,000 federal inmates in those private facilities. Does that executive order make it easier or harder for you to deal with the overcrowding issues that were raised earlier? Where are you going to put these folks?
Thank you, Senator. I know that there's been much talk about that. We were working on, we continuously assess our population. It's been trending downward. Long before mid-year last year, long before even the election or the change of administration, we determined we didn't need a certain amount of beds because of the trending downwards. So we had allowed 2 or 3 contracts to expire. We're down to 8. There's 11,000 in there right now, 13,000 beds. We don't need 2,000 of them. Those are expiring. So this was well in play, well before the executive order. We have 55,000 empty beds in our system right now. So we have ample bed space. So part of my responsibilities, as you know, Senator, is being a good steward of taxpayer money and utilizing our funds appropriately. So if we don't need a contract, I am not a political appointee. I'm a careerist, and I do my job, and I make sure that we appropriately spend taxpayer money. If we don't need that bed space, it has nothing to do with quality. We have partnered with the privates for years because we did rely on them when our count was at 220,000. We simply don't need the beds right now. That may change in the future. Right now, the Bureau of Prisons doesn't need those beds. It has nothing to do with quality or anything else. We simply don't need the beds.
So that's unrelated to the crowding issues that were raised by the chairman and others?
I'm not sure what crowding is down 7% system-wide. Part of that was because we did release inmates on the again through the CARES Act. 24,000 are on home confinement, and that doesn't count normal releases. So we have ample bed space. At one point in time, we were at 220,000. We absolutely needed help from the privates, or people it might have been an unsafe environment. At this point in time, today, our population is 125,000. And we have approximately 55,000 open beds. So it's not an issue right now. The best way for me to explain it.
Senator Cornyn, I'd just like to clarify. I think that Director Carvajal made this point too. It's just that it's the nature of the prison system that social distancing is a challenge for them. So I wasn't talking about crowding per se, but in context of COVID-19. As the directors mentioned, the total population has gone down dramatically.
I thought when we were talking about crowding and social distancing, those were related issues, but I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Booker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Director, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. I first just want to express my sympathies. I know that we lost correctional officers to COVID. I see these as line of duty deaths. In fact, I did a wonderful bill with Chuck Grassley to make sure that law enforcement officers who die of COVID get the benefits for their families that they should. There's a presumption of it being a line of duty death. But I know that your job in normal times, the officers under your command, it's an incredibly difficult, challenging job that they put themselves at risk in service of safety. So I just want to express my gratitude and my sympathies for the loss for the officers that were lost during this crisis. The risk assessment tool called Pattern that was designed under the First Step Act for good time credits. It's been used for home confinement and compassionate release during this pandemic. However, I've got serious concerns about the tool that we've expressed to your office because of the perception of bias that's built into the analysis. And it shows a sort of a stunning bias in terms of the number of African Americans versus number of whites who seem to qualify under that pattern tool. And so I'm wondering, will the BOP continue to use the risk assessment tool for purposes of home confinement and compassionate release for COVID-19?
Okay, thank you, Senator. Two things. First off, I mentioned this earlier, and I think it's important to point out, we did not develop Pattern. We assisted in the development through outside researchers and scientists, outside stakeholder input. And this tool showed across race, gender, and ethnicity, it had the highest level of predictivity, and that's why it was chosen. I did not choose it. We're the end user. It's the department's tool. It's being reassessed now. There were some adjustments made in January of 2020, Senator, to your point. There was a perceived or actual bias against people of color, so they removed two pieces of that. It was the age of first arrest and age of first of conviction and voluntary surrender. That was done to remove that bias or perceived bias, and it also created more transparency and fairness. Again, I did not select that tool. We are the end user, but it goes under review every year. There's independent researchers right now. The National Institute of Justice actually does the contracting for that. It's being assessed now, so I don't have anything to do with the assessment. We are the end user of that tool, so we will continue to use it as long as we're directed to use it.
So I know that you all are consulted and the DOJ works with you as they develop and perfect that tool.
Yes.
So your continued engagement on its fairness is
Our
really
staff were involved in it, Senator. The same thing with the needs assessment. We worked on the needs assessment with outside consultants, outside stakeholders, some of which were leadership of other correctional agencies, so that we get a good input of subject matter experts, and we developed the needs tool. We didn't develop it in a vacuum. We do get input from the outside. I was rather shocked at the IRC's report critiquing the tool when they had view of it and input of it also. So
well, again, it still seems to be imperfect, and I'm hoping that you guys have been very communicative with my office. I'm hoping you'll continue to take input with us as we try to get something that is ultimately fair and more fair and just.
I understand, Senator, everything can always be improved, and we certainly understand that.
And I appreciate this dialogue has been really constructive. And can we get back to just the issue of solitary confinement in the age of COVID? For many months, we've been looking at the Fort Dix's COVID-19 numbers, and they were said to be low because of the BOP's action plan, and the agency was taking steps in that context. But we just believe that that is actually not the case, and that courts were buying the argument, but denying compassionate release that people should have gotten. And again, to give you an example, there's a man named Mr. Marlanda Trujillo, who was an individual incarcerated at Fort Dix, whose motion for compassionate release was denied. His underlying health conditions were pretty significant. Severe coronary heart disease, heart failure, chronic arterial fibrillation, severe mitral valve regurgitation. I'm trying to say these things like I'm a doctor, but I'm not. Multi-vessel coronary artery disease, chronic diastolic heart failure, and more. Mr. Trujillo was later put into quarantine because of his risk of contracting COVID-19, but Fort Dix's quarantine process appears to have spread rather than contained the virus. And tragically, Mr. Trujillo died. And so this is to me a matter of not just justice, but it's a matter of compassion and empathy to keep people that are so frail in their condition, their risk to the population is so low. And so I just want to continue to be engaged with you on these concerns. We know in New Jersey, the virus, unfortunately, is still stubbornly persistent. And I'd like to just maybe end with just the question, what steps are you trying to take to continue to ensure that CDC guidance is being used to prevent more unnecessary deaths, and not putting people in solitary confinement, but really trying to lean into the idea of that word compassion, and as in compassionate release. And I know that this is, we need to move on to my colleagues, but I'm hoping that you can give me a brief answer now, but maybe we can continue to have dialogue between my office and yours.
Absolutely, Senator. Two things I want to clarify for you. I appreciate the opportunity. Number one, I can't necessarily talk about certain cases, but I will tell you in a case such as the one you described, the compassionate part of all that is the emotion, and I certainly understand. All of those deaths weigh on me. If we did not recommend that individual, there was a very good reason. I'll give you an example. They may have had a detainer or something of that nature, which is hard criteria. So I have to follow the rules, Senator. So sometimes people don't understand. We're not letting someone out because we don't want to or don't support it. We're following the rules as given to us. So I appreciate the ability to clear that up. Fort Dix, I oversaw Fort Dix as a regional director. As you are well aware, at one point there was over 5,000 inmates here. It was the single largest facility in our agency, one facility, two separate east and west. It's down about 50% capacity. I did that based on my working knowledge of that place. Our goal is to get it down because of the points you said. We learned early on that you can't social distance in an area like that, open barracks. So that's one of the things we did. The other thing I'll point out is from day one, we get much criticism about how we responded to COVID, but we have been in lockstep with CDC guidance all along. And when it changes, it's difficult for us in a correctional environment sometimes to apply that guidance, but we do our best to do it. Our medical director of the agency speaks to CDC on a weekly basis, sometimes daily basis. So I want to stress that to you, that everything we do is in lockstep with CDC. In fact, we had input on the guidance that CDC put out for correctional and detention centers. A lot of that came with our collaborative efforts with them. So I don't want anyone to think that we're making this stuff up as we go along. We are consulting with the experts out there and making adjustments. It's very hard to apply sometimes in a correctional environment because security and safety is always going to be first and foremost of everything. So thank you for allowing me to answer that.
No, sir. And again, the communication is really critical, and I appreciate that you having those open lines,
sir.
open channels.
Thanks, Senator Booker. Senator Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Carvajal, for your service, and thanks for being here today. You testified a month or so ago in front of an appropriations subcommittee, and in your testimony, when talking about private facilities, you described, as I understand it, those facilities as safe, indicating that BOP does rely on them and that they meet your safety standards. I was therefore a little bit surprised when the executive order came out, and the executive order relied in part on a conclusion that private contractors, quote unquote, consistently underperform. Based on your testimony, it sounds like that hasn't been your experience. Can you tell me, is there an inconsistency between that finding that they consistently underperform and your experience with them?
Yes, Senator. Again, I want to stress the point for the obvious reasons that I'm not a political appointee.
I understand.
I'm a careerist. So I have to, some of this I have to be careful how I say it because I don't want to think that I'm playing anything. I'm going to tell you based on my experience. We have partnered with the privates. The determination to quit using them was made well before even the election, much less the executive order came out. But to your point, they are held to a statement of work and a contract. If they were underperforming, we wouldn't utilize them. So that's the best way for me to say that. I'll follow up with one piece. We do have a contract, to your example, that we issued a notice of violation recently because they were not performing to standard. There's a process for that. I won't get into the facility or why, but that's the first time I know of that our agency has done that with a
You're talking about one contractor, I assume. That,
yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Gotcha.
But my point is that it can happen like anything else. They're either performing or they're not. We hold them to the standard.
That makes sense. You talked a few minutes ago about other aspects of the order. What about the part dealing with the U.S. Marshal Service? As I understand that U.S. Marshal Service relies heavily on private facilities, particularly for pretrial defendants, and that at any given time you might have as many as 62,000 individuals who have got to be able to make their court dates in federal court throughout the country. Only 14 of those defendants are housed in U.S. Bureau of Prisons facilities, meaning that the other 86% have got to be housed somewhere else. Given in light of that order, what will happen? What will happen to that? Does BOP have the resources to deal with those 62,000 U.S. Marshal Service detainees?
Well, Senator, I'll certainly defer to the United States Marshal Service to follow up with that. I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to speak about their operation. But as I stated earlier, at this point in time, our private facilities hold about 11,000 inmates. We have approximately 55,000 beds available at this point. But yes, we take in inmates from the Marshal Service. We collaboratively work with them all the time. And part of our mission, which we've been scrutinized early on, is movement. Well, the judiciary did not stop. So as you stated, the marshals take those inmates and they eventually come to us.
Right.
So yeah,
to be clear, those 55,000 spaces aren't necessarily where you need them
exactly
for the U.S. Marshal Service detainees.
Correct.
Gotcha. Since the Biden administration has begun, illegal border crossings have reached their highest level in about 15 years. It amounts to 171,000 people crossing over the border in March. And that's just the ones that Border Patrol has apprehended. That's not too far from the entire population of Salt Lake City crossing the southern border in one single month. Salt Lake City is just under 200,000 people. If private facilities are no longer available for use to detain criminal aliens, what's the likely effect that this massive increase of potential immigrant detainees, what impact is that going to have on BOP?
Well, Senator, we don't make the determination. Obviously, the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration and Customs Service, ICE, they oversee that process. We do hold non-U.S. citizens. It's about 17% of our population today. It's about 25,000. We work collaboratively with ICE for hearings, and they make the final determination whether someone's going to be deported or not. And we work with them. We don't house inmates traditionally. We have under emergencies for ICE, but we do work with the Marshal Service. So I would defer any questions about how that impacts to the Department of Homeland Security.
Mr. Chairman, I've got just a couple more questions. May I finish those? Thank you. I want to talk about the First Step Act, something that Senator Durbin and I spent a great deal of time working on over the years and are proud to have passed. That bill includes, among other things, significant programming for inmates. What specific programs and initiatives have you been able to implement under the First Step Act for prisoner development, rehabilitation?
Yes, Senator, we have over 80 evidence-based recidivism reducing programs or productive activities, as we call them. They range everything from GED and literacy to secondary education. Vocational training is something big we're trying to expand. Career technical education, part of the whole reentry process is giving someone the skills to apply when they get out. So all of the trades, that's a focus to try to teach these people a skill so that when they get out, they'll be productive. We're working on expanding our mental health treatment for, as I mentioned earlier, life skills. Some of our inmates need to learn basic life skills. One of the things that we learned, obviously, through COVID, like the rest of the world, is the use of virtual. Well, prisons aren't built for that, our infrastructure, so we're working on upgrading our infrastructure so that we can implement virtual programming to inmates so that we don't deal with this, need to social distance. They can do it from the safety of their cell. So we're looking at implementing tablets, things of that nature. But all of those come with security issues that we have to overcome, infrastructure issues that we have to overcome, things like that. The biggest focus right now, Senator, is hiring staff to deliver the program so that we can expand the capacity so that more inmates have the opportunity to earn those time credits.
Finally, during COVID, a lot of Americans have seen their religious liberties impaired in one way or another. Fortunately for our prison population, there are specific protections in our LUPA, as you know. It says that the government can't substantially burden a prisoner's free exercise of religion without satisfying strict scrutiny. What steps have you been taking to ensure that despite COVID-19 and other challenges you face, that incarcerated individuals are still able to exercise their religious liberties?
Very important to the Bureau of Prisons also, Senator, and that's one of the things that, along with our mental health treatment and our medical treatment, we consider that vital, critical. Our ability to provide religious services, although they've been modified in somewhat, have always been available, even through COVID. We've worked on getting volunteers back in here lately towards the end, now that people are receiving vaccinations and stuff. But obviously early on, it did impact the ability. We rely heavily on volunteers. We have over 11,000 volunteers. The majority of them are religious-based that come in. We serve over 30 congregate faith groups There is all types of opportunity. That doesn't count the individuals who choose to practice whatever faith they believe. So that has always been available during COVID, although it has been modified at times. We've had to make adjustments like everything else, but it was never not available.
Thank you very much, Director Carvajal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
Thanks, Senator Lee. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this important hearing. And Senator Lee, thank you for your work on this bill. I know I've been at meetings with you and Senator Durbin, Senator Booker, through various administrations where you helped to get the First Step Act passed, and I want to thank you for that. And I guess I'll start with that. I know you've had a few questions about this, Director Carvajal, and but you talked about what you're doing to implement that bill. And I've done a lot of work with drug treatment programs. We have a lot of good treatment programs in my state. And according to the independent review committee that was actually established as part of the First Step Act, BOP has not taken sufficient steps, including prior to the pandemic. So I understand the problems with the pandemic, everyone does, but to provide sufficient access to programming. Do you agree with the assessment? Do you think there was something wrong with the assessment?
Yes, I do, Senator. I can't speak for anything that happened before. I wasn't in the process or delivering, but from my time forward, I assumed this position about a month before COVID hit. So I would have to defer or follow up prior to that. But I will tell you that even through COVID, we had over 25,000 inmates complete a program for time credits. The IRC works with us. I'm familiar with the report and the recommendations they made. But we worked with them to do this. We've expanded our programs. We had over 41,000 inmates participate in drug treatment or education last year of some type in the Bureau of Prisons. So I'm not sure what it is that we haven't provided. I would need some specifics.
Okay, well, I think it's in the report that they talked about that there wasn't sufficient access.
They talked about capacity. We've expanded capacity.
Okay.
As I stated, over 41,000 inmates participated in a drug treatment or education program last year, even through COVID.
So what you're saying is you acted on those assessments?
Yes, from the time I've been in here, we are taking action to meet the First Step Act.
Okay, let's go to the focus today on the pandemic and what's happened there. The fight against the pandemic, as we know, continues to put more incarcerated people at risk. The BOP announced the deaths of 8 more incarcerated people in March and April of 2021. In addition to the vaccine, of course, testing is one of the best ways to control the spread of the virus, but according to a report by the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, BOP only tested 30% of the inmate population between February and August of 2020. Since August 2020, has the percentage of people in BOP facilities who have been tested increased, and do you have that number?
Senator, I know that we have conducted over 500,000 tests in the Bureau of Prisons of over 150,000 inmates at least. So that may include testing some twice, things like that. I follow the guidance of the CDC and my experts, my medical director. Early on, it's probably accurate. Testing resources were not available, Senator. We would have been applying.
I understand. Well, they're more available now, but I just want to look at the percentage, and it's okay if you don't have that. If you could give it to me later, that would be great, to go from the 30% to where you are since August 2020. Last June, I asked about testing of asymptomatic inmates, which BOP said it was doing in consultation with CDC guidelines. Do you know what percentage, again, you can put it in writing later, what percentage of BOP tests have been administered to asymptomatic inmates?
I don't know the number of percentage, Senator, but our strategy with the testing is in lockstep with CDC and correctional systems. Now, I know that has changed recently, and we're working on that now. My medical director is actually working on a plan going forward of how we would apply testing if the guidance changes. But we've been following the guidance. At one point, asymptomatic testing in our environment was not recommended because it wasn't a good use of resources.
Yeah, I remember. I know this way back when my husband had COVID and I didn't get a test, but things have changed over time because that was over a year ago. So you testified today when Senator Durbin was asking questions that while all BOP staff have been offered the vaccine, only 51% of staff have been vaccinated. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. It's about 51%.
Okay, why do you think that half of BOP have accepted the vaccine when offered and that half have not? What steps are you taking to combat the vaccine hesitancy?
Well, Senator, we have done a campaign effort, obviously encouraging it. Normally, as a leader, I don't do anything before my staff other than when I want to show them by example. This is one of those cases where I myself was vaccinated to encourage others that it was safe. I've done videos. We collaborated with the national union at the local level and the national level to encourage our staff to be vaccinated. It's a personal choice. We respect that. We don't mandate it. But it is in line with firefighters, police, critical infrastructure. I've seen everything.
No, I know, but it's just 95% of Mayo Clinic doctors have been vaccinated because they don't want to give it to their patients. And I keep thinking of the inmates that are there that, obviously incarcerated, but they can't choose whether or not the people that are close to them have decided to have the vaccination. So I guess that's something for us to deal with on another day. But that, to me, you have literally people who are incarcerated, and then you have people that have chosen not to get the vaccine. And then I look at the Mayo Clinic numbers are 95%. And so the people that go to Mayo Clinic, a place I'm very proud of in my state, those patients don't have that same risk as the people that are incarcerated. So my last question is about the last May, I sent you a letter expressing concern about how the BOP is assessing eligibility for home confinement, particularly after we learned about Andrea Highbear, who died in federal custody 4 weeks after giving birth while on a ventilator and after testing positive for the coronavirus. We know that weeks later, Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen were transferred to home confinement. I still don't have the data that I think I need to release information on how cases are prioritized and the demographic data of the people who were transferred. Can we get that? I mean, what percentage of transfers were denied because of an inmate's pattern score? The BOP's risk assessment tool, which Senator Booker mentioned, numerous civil rights and legal organizations have warned is likely to perpetuate racial disparity in decision-making. Can we get those percentage releases so we could look at them?
Yes, Senator, I will speak with my staff and follow up on that. I'd like to since you mentioned the pattern score, we have recently expanded the criteria working with the department. We have now given the authority to consider low pattern scores going forward, where before it was a minimum pattern score was the criteria. Working with the Department of Justice, we have increased that to consider low pattern scores now. So we are working to get as many people appropriately out, again, within the criteria we're given, Senator.
All right. Thank you.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carvajal, welcome. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your testimony. What currently is happening to Bureau of Prison inmates who are criminal aliens when their terms of incarceration expire? Are they being transferred immediately to DHS for deportation?
Senator, we have immigration hearing programs at 24 of our sites. We work in conjunction with ICE to do hearings. ICE makes the final determination of whether or not they're going to be deported or not. So we have a process that works with that. About 17% of our population are non-U.S. citizens. But again, ICE, working with them, they determine whether or not they're going to be deported. Typically, if they make that determination, there's a time frame. They come and pick them up, and then they're released to them.
So what percent of criminal aliens are being deported after they've served their prison time?
Senator, I don't know that information. You would have to ask the Department of Homeland Security. I don't track that system because it's not within my authority. So
the Bureau of Prisons doesn't keep records as to whether inmates are being released into the American population or being released into the custody of ICE?
Yes, we do, Senator. I just don't have that number in front of me. We can follow up with you on that.
Okay, I would ask you to please provide those data. What does the Bureau of Prisons do with inmates to minimize the risk of COVID transmission?
Like we do with everything else, Senator, we educate them, we enforce the rules, we provide face coverings, PPE. We try to spread our population out as appropriate as we can, put things in place, barriers, the same thing that I would say everyone else is doing to minimize the risk.
Do you also have reasonable social distancing so that inmates are not crowded in too closely with each other?
That was a challenge because prisons are made to contain people closely. So that has been one of our biggest struggles. But we are doing the best we can at this point, and with a reduced population, we've been able to do that. We're redistributing our population. We put COVID target population numbers on those open dorm facilities for the reason you said, so that we can allow more space between them. And we've expanded the use of non-traditional areas to spread them out.
A couple of weeks ago, I led a delegation of 19 senators who traveled to the southern border, traveled to the Rio Grande Valley, and we saw firsthand the crisis that is unfolding on our southern border. We visited the Donna tent facility, which was constructed to meet this enormous surge of illegal immigration that is happening right now. The Biden administration had implemented a ban on media seeing what was happening at the Donna facility. It was an unprecedented ban. Prior administrations did not ban the media from going in. The Trump administration allowed the media in. The Obama administration allowed the media in. The Bush administration allowed the media in. The Clinton administration allowed the media in. The Biden administration blocked reporters and cameras from seeing what happened. The Donna tent facility is this enormous tent city. It has a capacity of 1,000. It was built to hold 1,000 people. Under COVID restrictions, its capacity is 250. The day we visited the Donna facility, there were over 4,200 people crammed into a facility designed to hold 250 people with COVID restrictions. We saw firsthand the Biden cages. Joe Biden is building more and more cages filled with children, and the cages are more and more full than they've ever been. In these Biden cages, we saw little boys and little girls. They weren't 6 feet apart. They weren't 3 feet apart. They weren't even 3 inches apart. They were lying side by side by side on the floor. They had no beds. They had no cots. They had no mats. On the floor, holding emergency reflective blankets. The rate of COVID positivity in the Donna facility is over 10%. What we saw is inhumane. It is a humanitarian crisis. It's a national security crisis. It's a public health crisis. And it was preventable. It's the direct consequence of political decisions made by Joe Biden and the Biden administration. In the Federal Bureau of Prisons, would it be acceptable for federal prisoners to be housed in cages where they were side by side lying next to each other, packed in the midst of a pandemic?
Senator, the simple answer to that is no. We are scrutinized often for how we house our people during COVID. It's, as I stated, it's a challenge, but we absolutely treat everyone with dignity and respect. We have standards, and we meet that regardless of what day it is or what's going on.
And is there any Federal Bureau of Prisons facility that would be allowed to continue at 1,700% capacity, which is what the Donna tent facility is right now?
Again, Senator, I've never experienced that. I know we've been overcrowded before. We're fortunate at this point that we have ample bed space, but I don't want to answer that because I don't know the answer. I haven't faced that to be able to tell you that.
Well, all of this is continuing, and it's getting worse, and it's getting worse because of political decisions the Biden administration continues making. Thank you.
Senator Padilla by remote, I believe.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Padilla, I'm sorry your transmission
Hear me okay?
didn't start off well. Want to try again?
Let's try this.
You want to try?
Okay, is that better?
We'll see.
I'll try to keep it brief. I know several of the issues I wanted to raise today have already been asked, including clarity and a better picture on home confinement and the numbers of violations, et cetera. So appreciate Senator Grassley raising that earlier in today's hearing. I'll keep my remarks and question to one specific issue, and that is this. Recently, California Governor Gavin Newsom announced plans to close a state prison in Susanville, California, that has seen a steady decline in population, with COVID-19 being one of the immediate causes of the decline. But in closing the prison, it presents the state a tremendous opportunity to take some of the funds that are saved through that closure and invest elsewhere in state priorities while maintaining public safety. These funds could soon be reallocated for a number of projects and programs for the state. So my question for Director Carvajal is this. The federal prison population has been steadily declining for years, and the fallout from COVID-19 as well has further reduced the prison population. Have you considered closing any facilities and allowing an opportunity for the federal government to more strategically reallocate funds and address staff shortages at the same time?
Senator, that's a great question. The simple answer is we're not there yet. We are working as we speak on our realigning and reworking our capacity. As I stated earlier, one of the biggest challenges of the Bureau of Prisons is our aging infrastructure. Over 1/3 of our facilities are over 50 years old, and 45% of them are over 30 years old, which makes it rather challenging. These things deteriorate at a faster rate because of their consistent 365-day use in harsh conditions sometimes. So as we redistribute our population, again, as I stated earlier, part of my responsibility is to make sure that we put taxpayer money to good use. At some point, working through the department to see what our needs are, there may be recommendations on just that. But at this point, I would say the answer is no, but it certainly isn't anything that we would rule out in the future.
Okay. Well, I'd appreciate a commitment for an ongoing conversation on that front. I think we can be, more strategic, more effective, more efficient, frankly, in both maintaining public safety, but reforming how we not just house, but help inmates who do have an opportunity to reenter society do so on a more constructive basis going forward. So thank you for your testimony today.
Thanks, Senator Padilla. Senator Sines.
Thank you, Chairman. Director, thanks for being here, and thanks for your forthright manner thus far in the hearing. I'd like to ask some questions related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. Epstein obviously was a wealthy financier who ran a global sex trafficking ring that preyed on scores and scores of young women, and he and his cronies committed some of the most repugnant crimes imaginable against these young women, and yet he was allowed to die in the Bureau's custody despite being a known suicide risk. He deprived, or the failures of the Bureau in that apparent suicide deprived not only all these young women of having their day in court and justice to be done and meted out in a public way, the way we do in this country, but in addition, he took with him to his grave all of the additional evidence he had against many of his co-conspirators. And so I'd like to ask, can you think of any case that approaches the Epstein case in terms of a crisis of public trust for the BOP? Is there any case that rivals it?
No, Senator, I can't think of one.
So we're agreed. Thank you for that answer. We've had directors of the BOP in the past who gave long-winded, meandering answers, so they didn't have to acknowledge that we needed to have more resources focused in this case. Obviously, it's the most basic duty of the BOP to keep prisoners alive. So I guess as a strategic management matter, does every prisoner merit equal treatment, or do some inmates, such as those at the center of a sex trafficking ring where there's lots of evidence that hasn't yet been gathered against other conspirators, do some prisoners merit special attention and special measures to make sure that their life isn't at risk?
Well, Senator, first off, I'd like to say that we certainly treat people fairly, but all of our inmates, the cases like you described there, we apply the appropriate amount of security needs, things like that. So they're all special cases. Without getting into specifics, which I don't think would be appropriate about how we do certain things for certain inmates, the simple answer is that's part of our job to assess that and to apply the appropriate amount of supervision and security. And if it requires more in some cases, then we should be doing that. If it doesn't, we should. That's in essence what we do.
So thank you. Can you give us a top line on what went wrong in this case? I recognize that we have 2 guards who are about to go to trial in the case, so I understand that there's an ongoing investigation, but we're also over a year into this investigation, and past directors of the Bureau haven't given this committee any adequate answers. I mean, just bureaucratic nonsense. We're well over a year into the investigation. So what can you tell us about what went wrong?
Well, Senator, you're probably not going to like my answer, but it's a statement, it's a fact that I can't discuss it because it's still under investigation. I had my deputy director call the Office of Inspector General last week or so ago to get the status of the investigation. We were told that the investigation is on hold until which time the trial that is set for June, as you mentioned, takes place. I don't control the investigation. That is up to Inspector General Horowitz. You'd have to discuss it with him. So it'd be inappropriate for me to talk about anything regarding that other than what I've said already.
I understand that there will be things that could be used in court about the prosecution of the 2 guards that can't be discussed here. I don't understand why you wouldn't be able to explain to us what we know about the security footage. What particularly is missing and how did that happen? These guards aren't being investigated for anything related to their destruction of evidence, as far as I'm aware. So I get that there's an investigation that does touch on a prosecution of 2 individuals, but many more systemic things went wrong than just the things these 2 guards are being charged with. And so a year and a half into the investigation, we don't have anything to publicly say to the taxpayers or to these victims yet?
Senator, here's what I would say to that is, again, I can't speak about something that is under investigation. Here's what I will commit to, that after that investigation is over, and all of these things have been appropriately done, I will absolutely follow up with you on anything regarding what we could do better or different. I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to get into any of that right now because there's even a chance. So it's under litigation. I've been advised not to speak about it, but not because I don't want to, because it's not appropriate right now.
Okay, we will definitely keep you to your word on the pledge for the after action when this trial is over. Can you explain what processes have changed with regard to high-value targets? There are things you've surely learned that we would want to be implementing to make sure that other high-value targets, obviously every human life is equal in dignity in the eyes of God, but for the purposes of investigation of co-conspirators, we care more about keeping certain prisoners alive because they're necessary to be evidence and testimony in other cases. What processes have we changed to make sure other high-value targets are not able to commit suicide in a situation like this?
Well, again, Senator, without getting into specifics, which I don't think would be appropriate in this forum, I will say that we treat people as appropriate for their security needs. First of all, whether or not someone's valuable to a case or whatever is irrelevant to us. That's someone's job to do. We treat everyone's life of value. We're going to apply the appropriate security. So again, it's something that I don't think is appropriate to speak about now, but I certainly will follow up with you at which point I can and have that discussion with you.
I've given you credit for being forthright up to this point, but I don't think the answer you just gave aligns with where you started. I think you acknowledged at the beginning that certain prisoners are more important for the purposes of public trust and for other public investigations and other prosecutions that are happening. Ms. Maxwell, Mr. Epstein's chief of staff or co-conspirator, whatever we want to call her, she is of greater value to public trust than the median inmate in a facility today. So are you telling me that there's nothing additional that's being done to make sure that she can't commit suicide relative to just the median prisoner in any of your facilities?
We apply appropriate security. You asked me a question earlier, what have you learned? Again, without getting into specifics, Senator, the answer is we learned lessons from that and we have made adjustments. It's just not appropriate for me to discuss them. But not for the investigative reasons or whatever. We assess the security and the needs of someone who comes in. You use the word high value, special security needs, whatever. We are going to apply the appropriate security that we think we need to do to protect that individual, protect the staff, protect everyone. And we do that individually assessing these cases.
I've got more I'd like to discuss with you about this, but the chairman gets the gavel back, so I'll follow up offline. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator Sass. Senator Ossoff, I believe, is by remote. Are you with us, Senator?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Carvajal, for your presence today. Will you please provide to the committee an accounting of the policies, practices, and procedures that are implemented by BOP to ensure the preservation and retention of closed-circuit camera footage and other evidence relevant to investigations?
Yes, Senator, we have policies and procedures to retain that. Some of the issues that we've faced in the past were not necessarily retention; they were that things didn't work. It was our aging infrastructure. We have over 24,000 cameras in the Bureau of Prisons, and in the last 18 months, we've upgraded 116 of those systems. It's a resource issue. We're trying to get with a modern era, so to speak. It's a fiber optics upgrade so that we can go to digital platforms. Some of the issues we've encountered in the past, and certainly I have knowledge of that as a warden in some of these facilities, that sometimes the cameras weren't working when they should have been because things get old and dated. So we're committed to replacing those. We're working on that now. We've always had retention of systems in place. Most of the time when we didn't have it, it was because the camera was broken or there was a mechanical issue.
Thank you, Mr. Carvajal. And I'd like to just amend the request, and this is a request for the record. I'd like you please to provide to the committee an accounting of those practices and procedures, and also a list of identified incidents where such footage was lost within the last 2 years. Can you do that for us for the record, please?
We will follow up on that. I don't have that information in front of me, Senator, but we can.
No, forgive me. I just like your commitment that you'll provide that information to the committee.
I will take that back to my staff and see what we can get you, Senator.
Okay. Well, we can certainly compel that disclosure if it's not offered voluntarily, but I hope that we can get that on a voluntary basis. Can you please also provide to my office and to the committee an accounting of how many individuals in Georgia are currently serving their sentences on home confinement due to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yes, Senator. Again, I don't have specifics for that state, but I can certainly follow up with you on that.
Thank you. I'd be appreciative if you could provide that information to my office and to the committee. And I'd like to touch on this question of COVID-19 vaccines for BOP personnel, with a particular focus on USP Atlanta, but also taking a national perspective. What steps are you currently taking to encourage adoption of the vaccine by personnel at USP Atlanta? And what do you assess to be the public health benefits and the health benefits within federal facilities such as USP Atlanta and for the population of incarcerated persons of having greater vaccine adoption by BOP personnel working at those facilities, please?
Well, Senator, we encourage the staff to take it, but we also, because it's not mandatory, we respect their right to make the choice, and I have to do that. We believe that the way the vaccine was distributed, now that it's available, that inmates were protected under the umbrella of staff being vaccinated. That's how it was rolled out. That's why staff were chosen first to do that. But once again, we have to respect the rights of an individual to make that choice. With that said, we encourage it. We educate staff. We try to lead by example. In case, as I mentioned earlier, where I have been vaccinated, I put out video messages. We collaborate with our union. They do the same to encourage staff. But at the end of the day, it's an individual choice.
Thank you for that, Mr. Carvajal. Would you be willing to work with my team and to communicate with the leadership at USP Atlanta about how we can work collaboratively to encourage vaccine adoption by personnel at USP Atlanta in the interest of the health of employees at the facility as well as those who are incarcerated there?
Yes, Senator, I will.
Thank you so much. Mr. Carvajal, thank you again for your testimony. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thanks, Senator Ossoff. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, thanks for being here. A few months ago, DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel took up the question of what happens to prisoners released into home confinement. I'd like to return to that if we could. The opinion there concluded that since some inmates may have substantial time to go before becoming eligible for home confinement under ordinary conditions, the Bureau would have to recall these prisoners to correctional facilities. I think we're talking about 4,000 inmates or more. Can you give us a sense of what specific monitoring measures are being used to ensure that inmates in home confinement during the pandemic are complying with all of the applicable guidelines?
Yes, Senator. As you stated, currently there's about 4,500 inmates on home confinement specific to the CARES Act. What that simply means that under the current statute, that's 4,500 people that normally wouldn't be out at this point in their incarceration. They're being monitored. 94% of them are monitored by contracts, non-law enforcement. We rely on contract individuals to monitor these. Most of them are done electronically or GPS. The other 4% the other 6% are monitored by the United States Probation, federal location monitoring.
And has the Bureau been successfully able to track all 4,500? I mean, you haven't lost track of any inmates during this time?
Well, Senator, we've returned 150 to custody. 21 of that 150 were specifically for, 26 were for escape, for them not being where they were supposed to be. We found them. We brought them back to custody as we would be expected.
Very good. What steps is the Bureau taking to prepare for the return of all of these inmates to their respective correctional facilities?
Well, the attention we've gotten on that because of the opinion you stated in November, I believe that the Department of Justice put that out. We have always, it's part of our mission to prepare for that. The statute currently is written, as I mentioned earlier, home confinement was not intended for long-term placement. There's actually about 2,400 that have a release date over a year. There's a small number over 5 years. It's about 310. Okay, those specifically we would have to address because we wouldn't be in compliance with the statute. So either the statute needs to change or we need to make exceptions. The good thing about that right now is that we have time because the president extended the national emergency. So we're still covered under the CARES Act. Our concern, the BOP's concern over this is simply that we're following the law, Senator. It's not an opinion of who should be out or not. We follow the criteria. We do that fairly. We put them out. We're concerned with making sure that we're actually applying the law as written.
What challenges, if any, do you anticipate in returning these prisoners to custody at the correctional facilities?
Well, it isn't necessarily a challenge, Senator, because we have the ample bed space. We have over 11,000 beds available at our minimum security camps where most of those would go. If they've been in the community, they certainly could function at a minimum security camp. I think more so is that if someone's out there and they're being successful and they're following the rules and they've shown that they can do that, then we certainly want to work towards the whole point of this is that they're going back to society at some point. We also respect the fact, though, that these sentences were imposed by the criminal justice system and a court of law, and we respect that. That's why we get so much scrutiny about how we do this. Well, we simply respect the criminal justice system, and we have a responsibility to make sure that if a judge imposed a sentence, that sentence is served, but we're working within our authorities.
Very good. Let me shift topics. Mother Jones Magazine reported in 2018 that up to 72% of prison technology services, which includes tablets and video visitations, are dominated by just two companies. Those companies are GTL and Securus. That's overall, that's nationwide in the whole prison system. Do you know what that breakdown is for the federal prison system?
No, Senator, off my head, I do not.
Can you look into that and get back to me with what it is? And I'm wondering how much communication costs charged by these two companies to prisons and prisoners have increased over the last decade. Do you have a sense of that?
I don't know the specific number for those companies, Senator. I'll give you an example, though. The CARES Act called for free phone calls for inmates. They're free to the inmate, but they're not free to us. We've spent well over $100 million providing video services and free phone calls, which wasn't included in the budget. So it is a lot of money, but we also believe that that's the right thing to do because we've restricted visitation somewhat. So we try to balance it out, but that's the only number off my head. Specific companies, I don't know.
Well, here's what I'm driving at. I'm concerned that there's one or two technology companies who are benefiting disproportionately from this market. And in particular, there's also the practice of these same companies introducing special lockdown tablets into prisons, charging inmates by the minute, I believe, to read material that's in the public domain. All of the profit goes to the tech companies. And again, this is public domain material. That seems to me like a bit of a problem. And why should these companies, just a couple of them, be profiting from public domain material due to their monopolies in this market? So I'll follow up with you about that for the record, if I could. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawley, I want to clarify something because there was an exchange dialogue between Senator Grassley and Mr. Carvajal earlier, and I participated in it on the question that you raised. And it appears there are two or three things that I would like to clarify for the record. It is my understanding that the CARES Act gave BOP authority to place inmates in home confinement. The authority to initially place the inmate in home confinement was limited to the emergency period of the pandemic. But as well as it was crafted, the CARES Act did not suggest that the placement would end when the pandemic's emergency period ended. I believe it was silent on that. And then came an opinion that was handed down, I think you referred to it, on the closing days of the Trump administration, January 15th, Office of Legal Counsel, and they concluded that when the emergency situation ended, then home confinement authority ended. I believe this current Attorney General sees it differently, or may see it differently. Let me make that clear, may see it differently. I'm going to write him a letter and ask him to clarify where we are in this situation. I think Mr. Carvajal said as much earlier, that he's looking for some statutory guidance or other guidance of what to do now with this dilemma. And I hope we can clarify it. Is that, Mr. Carvajal, did I misstate or the situation?
No, Senator, I appreciate that. The CARES Act didn't change the fundamental statute for home confinement, so we've been placing CARES Act home confinement under that. Again, we stress we want to follow the law. There's no legal impediments to bringing them back, but you're absolutely correct. It didn't specify what to do with them. That's simply what we're saying, is that we need to be given guidance on what to do with these individuals so that we can follow the law.
Okay, I think that's where we come in play.
Thank
Either
you.
by requesting some opinion from the Attorney General, which would be my first effort, and if that does not clarify it to the satisfaction, then we'll have statutory response after that. Okay. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Senator Durbin. Welcome to the committee, Director Carvajal. I want to talk a little bit about Danbury. You and I have discussed it before, and I know that you're prepared to talk a little bit about it today. You well know that the way we conquer this pandemic is to put vaccines into people's arms, whether they're in prison or anywhere else, and whether they work in prison or anywhere else. In your written testimony, you have stated, quote, "At this point, all Bureau staff have been offered one of the COVID-19 vaccines, and by April 19th, all inmates will be eligible for a vaccine. By mid-May, we anticipate that all inmates will have been provided the opportunity to be vaccinated." We know that being offered or eligible for the vaccine is not the same as actually being vaccinated. That's the goal. Can you tell me what percentage of the Bureau of Prisons staff at FCI Danbury have been vaccinated as of today?
Yes, Senator, I don't have the numbers specific to Danbury for vaccinations because it changes daily and as we offer the rounds. I know that our total staffing is about 51% who've been
51
who have accepted the vaccine. I can follow up with you on the specific numbers for Danbury because again, these numbers change daily, and I have 122 facilities, Senator, so I don't have the exact numbers for every one of them.
Well, I would appreciate your following up and giving me that answer. Do you think you can do it in the next couple of days?
Yes.
Thank you. I have the same question. What percentage of the inmates at FCI Danbury have been actually vaccinated?
Again, Senator, I don't have the exact number, or I can't find it in my notes. The numbers, I will say, though, are on our public website. They change daily. We update it daily at 3 p.m.
I understand
and
they
both those
change
numbers are
daily,
on
so I'm not asking you to give me that number as of this minute or maybe even as of this day, but my understanding is that it's less than 50% at this moment. In fact, more like in the low 40s.
The acceptance rate in general is about 51% for staff, so it probably mirrors that.
Let me ask you, and I understand you're talking about the acceptance rate. I'm interested in the vaccination rate. What are you doing to make sure that at FCI Danbury, people are informed that this vaccine is safe and effective? It's safe and effective. Whatever misinformation may be spreading through the prison, and we know that there's a lot of misinformation that spreads in prison. What are you doing and the Bureau of Prisons doing to inform accurately and correctly that this vaccine is safe and effective?
Well, as I stated earlier, Senator, we educate the staff and the inmates. We talk about it. We lead by example. I myself am vaccinated. I did a video out to the staff, encouraging them. I did a follow-up video just as general information, encouraging them, looking forward to hopefully the vaccine playing a role in us normalizing our operations. Every location, including Danbury, has a local CEO and union leadership that walk and talk and encourage that. My staff just provided me the numbers, sir. 162 staff have been vaccinated to date and 323 inmates.
And what percentage is that?
I don't know the percentage off my head, sir.
Well, you'll get back to me with
Yes,
what
we
the
can.
percentages are. What more can be done to increase the acceptance rate?
Senator, we're doing everything that we can within our limits. We have to respect people's rights. I've asked these questions, Senator. Can I make them take the vaccine? The answer is no. It's under an emergency use authorization by the FDA. We've looked at every avenue. Okay, so short of compelling someone to do, which I can't do at this point, we encourage it, we walk and talk, but ultimately, like with everything else, Senator, we have to respect people's rights to either take it or not.
And I respect people's rights too, and I understand
Yes, sir.
that you have to respect them and commend you for it. But if we come to you with some ideas for what more can be done, you would implement them?
Yes, sir. We're always open to improving our operations, and if you have a good idea that will work for us, we're certainly open to listen to it.
Is the Bureau of Prisons currently offering vaccinations at FCI Danbury?
We're offering vaccinations as they come in. We don't make the determination of when we get them. That is done through the COVID therapeutics operation. We do have a staff member embedded in there. We work with them. And as the vaccines roll out, they determine the amount, they determine where they go and how they'll be distributed. We simply put them in the arms.
My understanding is that vaccinations at FCI Danbury were stopped as of late February.
No, I would have to follow up and find out if they were, Senator. It was simply because the distribution assigned to that area. Again, I have 122 facilities. That we don't make the determination. That's done by the therapeutics operation. They determine. It's kind of a hub and spoke system. They determine the amount that goes out.
With apologies, I'm going to interrupt you because my time is limited. Do you know whether FCI Danbury is currently offering vaccination? My information is that they ceased doing so as of late February. And my question to you is, when are they going to resume?
If they stopped offering them, Senators, because we haven't been provided the vaccine to offer them, I assure you that when we get that vaccine through the normal distribution, it is offered. Our goal is zero wastage. A shot goes in an arm. If a staff member doesn't take it, they get the first, then it goes into an inmate. So as it becomes available, we distribute it and we utilize it. It's 60%.
So you're saying that the vaccine has not been available at FCI Danbury?
I did not say that, sir.
All right, let me give you a chance then to clarify. The vaccine is currently not offered at Danbury, but it would be if you had the vaccine to provide.
As the vaccine becomes available as designated by the therapeutic operation for Danbury, it is absolutely offered. When it comes out, distributed to them, we offer it.
Let me move on, and I appreciate your following up with additional information on FCI Danbury. In January, Senator Murphy, Representative Hayes, and I sent a letter to Warden Easter. She was then warden. We specifically asked her to describe FCI Danbury's current medical staffing and capacity to provide medical care and treatment to incarcerated individuals who become ill due to COVID-19 or other underlying conditions. We were told, and I'm quoting, FCI Danbury medical staff are actively recruiting in an attempt to fill current vacant positions, end quote, to fill current vacant positions. That answer was unresponsive. Can you tell me, Director, how many open positions there are at FCI Danbury and how long those positions have been open?
Yes, Senator, the good news that you should like this is that they're at 102% staffing, which is extremely rare in this agency. With that said, it's because they've overhired correctional officers. There is 3 medical vacancies.
3 medical vacancies.
Yes, part of the problem there is that we have trouble competing with the local. Obviously, there's probably higher paying jobs in the area, so that's one of our challenges. Their numbers for COVID are low as we speak. They've gone down. They had 0 positive inmates and 2 staff inmates. And to answer your previous question, because I'm not good at math and I didn't attempt to do this, but my staff did, thankfully, 60% of the staff and 43% of the inmates have been vaccinated. And I apologize that I couldn't work that in my head that quick.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Director.
Senator Cotton.
Mr. Carver-Hall, you just revisited with Senator Durbin, exchange you had with Senator Grassley, so I want to revisit it as well about CARES Act home confinement. So under the CARES Act, the BOP received extraordinary authority to put into home confinement prisoners who would otherwise not be eligible for home confinement under prior law. Is that correct? And
yes.
And your testimony is that when the emergency period expires, the Bureau no longer has authority to keep those prisoners in home confinement. Is that correct?
What I stated, Senators, as written, the statute for home confinement and our policies, it is a reentry transitional program made for 10% of their time or 6 months in home confinement, up to 12 months community placement. There are several inmates currently on home confinement under CARES Act who will fall outside that guideline. In order for us to apply the statute appropriately, we need the guidance or it needs to be changed. That's what I was trying to explain.
So and you said you have about 4,500 persons under home confinement now who
currently on CARES Act.
Who would otherwise not be there, but are there because of the CARES Act.
At this point in time in their incarceration, they would not be because of that. Doesn't mean they wouldn't be eligible at some point.
Yes, and I understand too that some of those who are lawfully under home confinement because of the CARES Act will time into eligibility for home confinement under the prior law, 10% of the sentence, 60 months, whichever is lesser. That's correct.
That is correct. About 2,400 of them are over a year, so half, roughly 50%. If you extend that out to 18 months, it drops the number to about 1,800. And the reason I say that is we could work with a plan. We're working with DOJ. Part of our recommendation would be working with something like that. Again, I stated earlier, we want these people to be successful. They're coming back to our community, obviously, or we wouldn't have put them out. So to bring them back for 2 or 3 or 4 months, we would take that into consideration. But again, we work within the law. So all of those things need to be, we are working with DOJ on recommendations on how to do that should the need arise.
But surely for that segment of that population that has years left in their confinement. It can't be the Bureau's position or the department's position that they can now stay on home confinement just because they had the good fortune of being released to it during the pandemic.
Well,
Or to
Senator,
use the statutory phrase, during the covered emergency period, once that period ends.
I understand, Senator. That's why I'm asking the question. That's why we're trying to clarify this. There's roughly 310 with over 5 years who met the criteria. Obviously, they're low risk or we wouldn't have placed them out. But in order to be compliant with statute, we have to address that. That's simply what we're saying.
I agree, and I think the statute is perfectly clear on that. I want to turn to one of the most pernicious problems that I believe you face and that our state and local prisons and jails face as well, and that's the problem of contraband cell phones. The Inspector General has listed this as one of your Bureau's top challenges, something that I've heard about repeatedly from our corrections officers and sheriffs in Arkansas. And the reason for that is, of course, that the contraband cell phone enables every other kind of contraband, weapons and drugs and anything else. These cell phones are sometimes used to run massive drug trafficking rings or order murders, extort people, intimidate witnesses. I'll give you just a couple of examples. One, the family of Joseph Michael Wood, an inmate in a maximum security prison in Alabama. Inmates used contraband cell phones to extort his family, demanding money to guarantee his safety. After his family had had enough and refused to answer, Mr. Wood was murdered. Another example was the family of correctional officer Osvaldo Albarati, who was murdered in a hit directed by inmates through contraband cell phones. His offense in their eyes, he'd been performing his job and confiscating contraband cell phones. I've introduced in the last Congress, and I'll introduce again soon, and I hope to have bipartisan support, the Cell Phone Jamming Reform Act. It would explicitly make clear that state prisons can use targeted jamming to block cell phone signals in prison housing units. I've been disappointed at the telecom companies' resistance to this legislation, but I hope they're going to come to their senses more of these cases arise. Could you tell us, Director Carvajal, what steps the Bureau is taking to address this issue, and in particular, pilot programs you had and what you've learned from those pilot programs?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Pre-COVID, if you would have asked me the question what our number one problem is, we always answered drugs, drones, and cell phones. They're all connected, as you alluded to, so it's a severe problem. We appreciate the support from Congress in our budget. We got appropriated approximately $12 million to conduct some pilots. We have 2 ongoing now. One of them is at FCI Edgefield. It is a pilot for managed access, which is one of the types. And then, as you mentioned, jamming, we have a pilot ongoing at USP Atlanta and then part of our Florence complex. We're also going to use some of that funding designated to jam a complex. I don't remember off my head which complex, but that's multiple institutions. So it's very much helpful. The reason we're running multiple pilots on different is, again, federal government, certainly you're aware of that. We have to be fair and assess these. That's what the point of the pilot is. Depends on who you talk to of which technology is better or not. But we certainly appreciate the support, and it is a severe problem.
Yeah, and I'll be eager to hear all the results of those pilots and to share them with state officials. I know the telecom industry has advocated for so-called managed access technology, and I would leave it in the hands of state officials to make their decisions. But I want to point out a third case in which a South Carolina prison was using a managed access program, and still a contraband cell phone was used in a blackmail scheme that ultimately resulted in a needless death. So to me, the easiest way to solve this problem is just to jam these cell phones. So I appreciate the work you're doing on this, and that you will share with the Congress and share with state counterparts. Also want to thank you and all of your officers. I've been at the facility at Forest City. It's an incredibly difficult job, one of the worst, or one of the toughest jobs in some of the worst conditions we have with truly violent offenders. And I want to commend you and all the men and women that work in the Bureau for your service to our country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Carvajal, I'd like to ask a question about the issue of solitary confinement. And that, of course, is described in many different ways. I believe restricted housing is the term that BOP uses. I've heard administrative separation, a number of different categories, but it usually means that an inmate is confined to their cell for up to 22 hours a day. and given opportunity to leave the cell for exercise or other reasons for maybe 1 or 2 hours. Is that a general definition that fits with BOP guidelines?
Yes, Senator.
So I'd like to ask you this. First, I'm starting with a premise I want to see if you agree with based on a lifetime of service in correctional institutions and your current position. The Department of Justice issued a report in 2016 that noted that the use of restricted housing, quote, can cause serious, long-lasting harm and should be, quote, used only as necessary and never as a default situation. Do you accept or disagree with that conclusion?
Yes, Senator. It's a bit more difficult because, as you said, I spent 29 years in the system. It's our jail within the jail. I'm not. We've always looked for alternatives and other ways to do it. It should be a last resort. But there are people who, under circumstances because of behavior or violence, things like that, there's going to be a need for it. But we can do better, and we've done that in the Bureau of Prisons. We found alternative ways. We certainly try to do more out-of-cell programming for the reasons you stated. But let me give you a quick example of the irony here. Much of the scrutiny we received during COVID was how we were isolating inmates. The word in and of itself, isolation, it requires us to place someone in a cell by themselves for medical reasons. So there's a simple irony that we're being scrutinized for restrictive housing, yet you want us to medically isolate somebody, and then we have to balance that. So there is a difference. We have found alternatives. In fact, your facility in Thompson is serving that purpose. They're called, half of that mission, as you're well aware, Senator, is a special management unit. The other half of that, I'm proud to say, is a reintegration housing unit. There's 700 inmates on that side in a reintegration housing unit that would otherwise be in special housing based on their issues, whether it's management or protective custody. So we utilize that facility. Half of that mission is to prevent and keep people as much as possible out of restrictive housing. So we're continuously looking at this. Our numbers have gone down. They were well over 10,000, as you're well aware. I know this is an issue that's been close to you and you monitor. Pre-pandemic, we were already dropping them down. In my prior position as assistant director, I was supporting Director Hawk Sawyer's vision to lower those numbers. And that's how we came up with the reintegration housing unit. So we are looking at ways to lower that number and alternatives, but it is something serious, and we get inmates out of their cell as much as possible, and we certainly have procedures to check on them routinely and provide them the same services.
Let me add for the record, so my position is clear, that I visited a maximum security state prison in Illinois, and went into an area where there was virtual solitary confinement. They were just a few exceptions. And I, eye to eye, spoke to the inmates. And I'll never forget one who looked to me like a mild-mannered college professor. And I said to him, "What are you here for?" He says, "Originally, or since I've been in prison." And I says, "Today." He said, "Well," he says, "I told them if they put someone in the cell with me, I'd kill them, and I did." He just said it that matter of fact. And I've since explored the case. That's exactly what happened. There's no doubt that that man should be in solitary confinement until such time as there is assurance he's not a person that will harm another person with him. I understand that. There are people who fit into that category. But I'm trying to weigh what the Department of Justice said in 2016 with the cost of solitary confinement to someone who is not in a desperate situation like the one I described. Now, I hear you saying when we have to deal with social distancing, I'm separating some people for medical reasons. It sounds like you're saying. And I don't want those counted against me in terms of efforts to reduce restricted housing. Is that a fair summary of what you said?
Yes, Senator. I want to reiterate the challenges that we undergo in our environment. You know, certainly if we can find alternative methods to house somebody, we're always going to do that. Having been a warden many years and working through this, there are always, as you described, there are always people who are going to have to be there for everyone's safety. But most of those folks have committed some kind of misconduct or something, and we are finding alternative methods to deal with that as appropriate, and we do that when we can, and we're committed to doing that going forward.
I want to thank you for being here, and I'm sorry it took 2 years. We should be meeting on a more regular basis. The participation of the members of the committee is an indication that we all have an interest in what you're doing. It's very critically important to the security of America and to proving our humanity in the process. So I thank you for being here today. I'm going to conclude the hearing by saying, first, I have a number of statements I want to include in the record. The testimony of the Sentencing Project, Families Against Mandatory Minimums, Council of Prison Locals, Justice Action Network, Clara LeBeau, the grandmother of Andrea Highbear, medical expert Homer Venters, Dr. Homer Venters, and a number of other organizations. And without objection, the statements will be included. The record will close 1 week from today. Director Carvajal, thanks for joining us today and for your testimony. A number of members have asked for follow-up information. I trust you and your staff will comply. I look forward to working with Attorney General Garland, the Justice Department, Bureau of Prisons, and partners like Ranking Member Grassley to confront the many challenges the Bureau of Prisons faces, and the meeting will stand adjourned.
Thank you, Chairman.